Welcome to the Strong Life Coach podcast, where we speak life, coach life, write life, and lead life. Today, I'm joined in the podcast studio by Justin and Irene Renton, all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. Justin and Irene, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Derek. It's good to be on your show.
Thanks, Derek.
All right. Well, I'm pumped and I'm excited about what you're going to talk about. I think you both have some great insight to share. But before we jump into the questions and the conversation, I do want people to know who both of you are and really, I think this adds so much credibility to what we're talking about today. So both of you are authors of one book, or two books. One of them is The Healing of a Wounded Idealist. And then you have a new book out. It's called The Humble Idealist, a handbook to healing of a wounded idealist. You two oversee churches in 12 countries of Southern Africa. That totals 26 churches with about 2,600 people. You live in Johannesburg, South Africa. And again, you're joining me on this call all the way from Cape Town. And you have two children, a 19-year-old Elena and a 16-year-old Luke. And again, I really appreciate and respect what you do in the service you provide and the way that you guys lead. I've heard both of you speak on a couple of occasions now. But I want us to jump into the first question is, what inspired the vision for your two books here?
Well, interesting, Derek, we never actually started out with the idea of actually writing a book. So I've been reading a different book by John Ortberg called Faith and Doubt, and it described somebody who, if you scratch under the surface of a cynic, you'll find a wounded idealist.
Yes.
And I spoke to my wife and I said, sweetie, I think this is descriptive of what you're going through. Mm-hmm. And so we began actually with writing a number of sermons that we taught to our staff in Johannesburg and then taught to the Joburg church. And it was really through a series of sermons that we ended up eventually deciding to put it into a book. But it didn't actually start off with the concept of wanting to be a book.
Mm-hmm. And so when you started delivering those messages, what took place? I mean, and I imagine because you're speaking on a regular basis, you're able to get some great feedback. Was the feedback from the people that would said, you know what, we have to put this in a book now? Like what happened there from you have this sermon series to this now that you felt the call or the push to put this in book format?
Well, Derek, it was just totally the Holy Spirit, because we, as Justin said, we never planned to put it in a book, but I was feeling in all my idealistic, because I'm absolutely the idealist and Justin is the realist. So in all my idealist strivings, I felt like I'm not effective enough for God. So one of the thoughts I was having was maybe I need to get more degrees, or maybe I need to educate myself further or something. And we thankfully had Christian Ray. He's an awesome brother who was in the Moscow church and now lives in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. But he was visiting us, and he helped us to understand, no, if you want to become an expert in an area, what you do is write a book, 10 pages, 10 chapters. Each chapter has 10 pages and 10 chapters. And he said, the funny thing is, even if no one buys the book, if it gets published, then you're an author and then you can become an expert.
Yeah.
So obviously this totally was fabulous. I was like, oh, wow, I can become an expert overnight. And so, I was very passionate about the material. Justin and I were both very passionate about the material. And so we thought, okay, well, you know what? Let's write a book. I think the other thing is that, I had become very wounded in my faith, and as a women's ministry leader, leading a lot of women, needing to be someone who's pointing people towards God and faith. I was really battling. And that's when Justin found that quote and helped me to recognize that I'd become a wounded idealist. But we couldn't really find a lot of books that addressed specifically returning to faith from a cynical place. You know, we read books on apologetics or, you know, on how to find faith and evidences for Christ, but not a book that would help a person return to faith once they become cynical. And so that's why we just decided, okay, between what Christians said and we felt like a need, we decided to write the book.
Yes. And I'm going to take a moment to remind the listeners to listen to what Irene just said. And she got that from Christian Ray, and this principle of, you know, sometimes we want to be the expert, or we want to take it to the next level in our effectiveness. And that idea of 10 chapters, 10 pages. And here we are, and we're podcasting from across the world. And you're talking about the book again. It's influenced, you know, so many lives. And again, you both of you had me crying on the first book. I think when I picked it up, thinking I'd read a few pages and then come back to it. But I remember once I started, I said, no, I'm going to go in and clear out my schedule. And I'm going to go in and spend this next 60 to 90 minutes finishing The Wounded Idealist. It was that powerful to me. Especially, I think I relate so much to Peter, right? Peter and his journey. And I think that's something that stood out to me. I think I'll never forget the connection that you both made between Peter in his early years versus Peter in his later years.
Yeah.
And I love that. So again, I'll share from me. Thank you for the insight, because it's been a game changer for me, especially, I became a Christian when I was 17, and then, and tell me what you think, but you're almost that much more idealistic when you're young, and you think, man, I found the perfect place in the world, other Christians. And then,
totally.
and then like when you find out, like I remember the first divorce I'd ever saw in the church setting, it was like heartbreaking and soul crushing. It's like, no, like this is the one place this isn't supposed to happen. Like forget 90%, like we're supposed to, everybody here is supposed to do it right,
Exactly.
But anyway, so again, thank you. Go ahead, Justin. Go ahead.
No, I think that's so true. I mean, I think churches are the places that that attract idealists, because it's the perfect world that you're looking for. It's the perfect relationships. It's the way things were originally designed by God. It's it's back to the Garden of Eden in many ways. That's what the church is trying to recreate, is the Garden of Eden. So so it is very attractive to idealists, but unfortunately, that snake still lives in the garden in today. So the perfection that we seek, is still, we have to wait till heaven for that one.
Yes. So for people who haven't read the first book, I would love for you two to discuss a little bit about the transition that you describe with Peter in that book, from who he is and from walking with Jesus to who he is when he's writing 1st and 2nd Peter. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that perspective from the first book, from Healing of a Wounded Idealist.
But I think the biggest surprise to most idealists is the amount of suffering that you're going to still experience on earth. I think that idealists are surprised by suffering. They're shocked by it. And I think what's so interesting to see, in Peter's journey, and then the letters of Peter, is how much he talks about suffering in the letters. He's constantly referring back to, the amount of suffering we're going through. Don't be surprised about the suffering you're going to go through. What suffering produces in us, that the very person we followed, that we are following, had to go through suffering. And it's just, Peter has reconciled the importance and the necessary of suffering in our lives, and I think you can just see how he's matured through that process. And I think that's such an important growth step for everyone to go through, but particularly idealists, because they think the world is going to be an ideal place without suffering.
Yes.
And I think the other thing that idealists do is avoid or distract from suffering. or difficult times. And so we don't get the character growth we need to. We are very clever at getting out of things and getting out of what we can potentially see as difficult. And that's what we see with Peter. So, you know, in the garden, when the soldiers came, I mean, although he had made all these promises to Jesus about sticking with him. So idealists, we can be very brave talkers. I mean, we have all the right words. But when the rubber hits the road, I mean, he was out of there in a flash. And I think the amazing thing to know about 1st and 2nd Peter, it was written to Christians that were undergoing extreme trials. And instead of telling them to make a run for it, which I think the younger Peter would have done, is just get out of there, you know, change your country, change your situation. He encouraged them to embrace their situation and embrace their suffering and to consider it light and momentary. So I think that's very powerful, that idealists learn to stick it out and let the growth happen that needs to happen when you're going through trials instead of trying to avoid the trials. Yes.
Wow. And there's so much insight in that phrase, and even just that perspective of, if for me, right, when it comes to one thing I see in 2nd Peter, right, when he's talking about, you know, make every effort to add to your faith goodness and goodness knowledge. And he goes on the list, but he talks about adding perseverance. And if you would have asked me maybe 4 years ago to teach somebody on perseverance, I probably would have almost in zeal been, all you got to do is not give up. But there's so much more, even how you both are talking about, like, of even learning the lessons of growth in the suffering. And I got that a lot from you both sharing that insight. So let me let the listeners know. So that's a book you certainly want to grab, the Healing of a Wounded Idealist, and absolutely, I also endorse the Humble Idealist as well. And Justin and Irene, I want to ask, because there is a shift that I think if people who have read both or who will be reading both will see is in the first book you both hold up the Faithful Realist is kind of how Peter's described in the book from a 1st and 2nd Peter perspective. And the second book, you come back with this idea of the Humble Idealist. So talk about the shift in focus.
That's a great question, Derek, and one we really grappled with. You know, I think what Justin and I spoke about, prayed about, studied out is just the difference between idealism and faith. And that ultimately where faith is birthed is in humility. And so we see the incredible faithful people of the Bible. And that's what we go through in the last chapter, is that really humility is the key for this faith that we, you know, especially idealists long to have, that stable, secure, steadfast faith. But it starts with that humility. And I think idealists, we lack a lot of humility. We think we are right. We think we know what's best, and we think our ideas are correct. And so for an idealist to really be able to embrace faith, they have to embrace humility. And so what we proposed was that in order to become faithful, you need to become a faithful realist. You're able to see things from a realistic point of view, but also faithful. And I think we ended it there and we felt good about it. But then we realized as we went on, especially myself, is that your temperament doesn't change just because you have a different perspective. God gave each one of us a temperament, a personality that we're born with. Yes. And so we transitioned and said, you know what? The truth is, I'm always going to be an idealist. I mean, it's just the temperament God gave me. Yes. And so to try and become a realist is like expecting an apple to become an orange. It's just not going to happen. And in fact, it's more frustrating for an idealist because you can't change your perspective. It just is the perspective you have. But rather, if an idealist will embrace humility, then they can become faithful. And so that's why we actually changed it to be the humble idealist rather than the faithful realist. Wow, I like that. I like it. And it speaks to me. It speaks to me on all levels. And similar to both of you is I did marry a realist. And so she's often telling me to come out of imaginary land. And in a good way, in a good way. And she helps, I mean, from a financial perspective, she is amazing, right? Like, and she helps so much with that, helps with
healthy boundaries and not overpacking our schedule, because the idealist in me wants to meet with everybody, but it's not, there's a part of me that's not humble to the boundaries that I have, even with time. Even as we budget for different projects, I own a business, and my wife is a registered nurse. And I always think that a project will be done quicker and less expensive than it is, right? And this idea of, however fast I think this can happen, I probably need to double it, and I probably, however expensive I think this project is, I probably need to also double or triple it. Just to have some kind of humility to the circumstances around me, because on my own, I won't nail the reality around me. So,
absolutely.
So I do want to just to grab a few snippets from the Humble Idealist and have some conversation, maybe a little breakdown from the new book. I know there's this one quote that I grabbed, and just so you know, when I'm reading a book and I'm just grabbing these quotes and I'm filing them away, I'm like, oh, I'm going to take that one, use that for a lesson. I'm going to use that for a mentoring time, and you both did an amazing job giving me so much content in being able to pull out these nuggets, these pearls from the book. But so I'll start with the first one. The first one says, "No one can go back and make a brand new start, but anyone can start now and have a brand new end." So talk about that one. Talk about that one and what it means to you and where that came from.
So I'll share, because a lot of these quotes, really are helpful for an idealist. I think a realist sort of, hears a quote like that and says, nice, good. An idealist, like you say, is able to say, oh my word, this is so great. So I think, I think if you're a young idealist and you haven't had any suffering or haven't gone through any difficult times, a quote like that can seem a bit trivial. But I think when you've been through stuff and you've been wounded and you start, things aren't as clear. The future is not as clear anymore. It's starting to look a little jaded. You're starting to lose hope. You're starting to lose faith. A quote like that is helpful to recognize that, what? Things have happened. You've suffered. You've gone through trials, but that doesn't mean it's the end. In fact, if you change your perspective and embrace faith, it can be the start of a new beginning, and your end can be different. And I think for an idealist, that resonates with us, because sometimes we're always looking back to the good old days, to back when, when I was 17 and I was so fabulous on campus, and I was so zealous, and I studied the Bible with this many people, and you're sort of longing for those days, instead of saying, no, we can have faith today, and God can use that today, and He can change the trajectory of our future if we would embrace faith and the humility we need today.
I love that, because there's so many examples that were coming to me, and people around me. I know we mentioned divorce earlier. We mentioned in the Christian journey, in the journey of faith, it's one of the most heartbreaking experiences to see people leave the faith, right? I've again joined, becoming a Christian at 17. I'm 34 now, so I was half my lifetime ago, and so I'm like, I feel, and it's not just I even feel it. I know it, that going from the teen ministry, and I was in the youth ministry to start, and then going through campus ministry, going through singles ministry, and then being in the marrieds ministry now, it's there's so many people that I've started with or been on the journey with who haven't stayed with it. And, it gets me choked up. It gets in, I know I'm not better, but I just, in that space, you always figure you're all going to go through this together and stay with this forever. But the idea of restarting now and having a brand new end, it's invigorating, it's motivating.
Glad that helps.
Amen.
So there's one quote I grabbed on cowards that you mentioned. It says, disappointed idealists aren't cowards, as some may think. They are reeling from the pain of being unable to reconcile their reality with their idealistic expectations. So talk about that one on cowards.
Yeah, I don't think it's got anything to do with cowardice. I think it is it's disappointment. It's it's a disappointment between the expectations that you have for so many things in life. Health, the relationships, the church, your political beliefs or what have you, and the reality that you face in life. And there's a disappointment that just really is wounding. So I don't think it's really got anything to do with cowardice. But it's learning how to reconcile those two and work your way through it and understand that disappointments are a big part of life in every area, and that's where the suffering comes in, and that's where the character growth comes in.
Yes.
But it's not about cowardness or courage. It's learning how to spiritually deal with disappointment and not let that take away your faith.
Yes. What's fascinating is we know, like in studying, is how cowardice is a serious vice, right? It's a very serious vice. And outside looking in, if we could see people not as vigorous or not as zealous as they once were, and attribute it to, is it their cowardice that's involved? But what I see, what you guys write about, it's people are processing pain, and that's a journey in itself. The processing the pain, and then not be so quick on the outside looking in to say, you know what, they have a cowardice problem versus they have a pain problem, and helping them reconcile the reality with expectations.
Absolutely.
And here's another one. You mentioned. You said we can confuse expectations and faith. Whereas faith is actively trusting God and leaving the outcome and our happiness in His hands, expectations are just mental creations. Talk about that one.
Yeah, that's a big one with idealists. We really don't get a lot of stuff.
Yes.
I think that we just go through life with these expectations that, where do they come from? That's what we mean by mental creation. I mean, where do they come from? My spouse should do this or should do that. And I think that word should is really that'll be the tell all that, okay, you have an expectation here, So
yes.
Instead of, for example, with Justin, instead of expressing to him, I'd love to be able to chat, I'd love to be able to talk, what I'm going to do is walk around and be, moody and expect him to notice. And then he should, as a good husband, say to me, oh, sweetie, you look so sad. Let me help you. And I think sometimes that's what idealists do, is we go around expecting the world to treat us in a certain way, expecting relationships to be a certain way. And that in our minds, we think they should be because that's how we would be, or, that's what good Christians would do.
Yes.
And I think that faith is saying, all right, understanding my husband is not the most aware of my moods and emotions. So in faith, I understand that about him. And so I'm going to express to him, I need to talk. I'm feeling emotional. I need to have a conversation rather than expecting him to. So I think faith is much more grounded in the reality and the humility to express your needs, express what you want, express what you hope for, rather than withdrawing or just expecting everybody to understand or know what you hope for.
Yeah, and I think there's so many great good Bible examples of showing the difference between expectation and faith. And you have Jesus in the garden, right? And he's praying, please take this cup away from me. I mean, I really don't want to go through with this. But then he also says, but your will be done. In other words, there's a faith, I know God could do this, but I'm also surrendered if he doesn't. Yes. We have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're going to be thrown into the fire, and they say, we know our God can rescue us from the fire, But even if he does not, we're not going to bow down. And it's again, having faith that God can do it is very different from saying God will do it.
Wow.
And so God can rescue us, but even if he doesn't, and as we surrendered to the outcome, and I think that's the difference between expectations and faith, is that faith is surrendered to an outcome that could be very different from what you are expecting, or what you're hoping for.
Yes.
And that's still okay with us. We trust in God's wisdom and his sovereignty that it's still okay if it doesn't turn out the way we want it to. We're okay with that.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And you explaining that, it brought up the example you both use in the book about I guess it was the husband who had his wife who was terminally ill. And
such a sad situation.
That was like a punch to the stomach. And it was, he was so filled with expectation that God would heal his terminally ill wife. And to the point, the detail you both include is the detail that he wouldn't allow the wife to write goodbye letters to the children, or the so long letters, because he thought he saw that as evidence of a lack of faith, and how difficult it was for him when she declined rapidly and then passed. How difficult it was for him in his walk with God, and the disappointment. And I think again, that example, I think it hits home, because it's emotional. It evokes the emotion of disappointment and sadness, and oh man, that's so rough to deal with.
Yeah.
And so here's another quote I have from the book, and for the people listening in, I know I'm giving you some great quotes, and believe me, there's so many in there. I couldn't even possibly go over all of them in one podcast. But the next one I have is: the opposite of expectation is acceptance. While expectations are based in the imaginary, acceptance is grounded in reality. So that was a mind shifter for me. That was forcing that paradigm shift to take place. So talk about that one. The opposite of expectation, acceptance.
Yeah. So I think that idealists have a hard time accepting reality. In fact, we in the middle of the book, we speak about disillusionment that idealists go through. And I think, we don't mind illusions. We don't mind having this vision that everything is perfect. And I think it's hard sometimes to accept that things are not perfect, things don't work out. And yet that's actually what we need to do, and that's the opposite, is acceptance. And I think, to me, it comes down to, Derek, is really accepting ultimately the sovereignty of God, that God is all-knowing, he is all-wise, he is all-loving, all-kind. He can be everywhere. He is in today, tomorrow, yesterday, all at the same time. And to accept that he actually knows better, and that he is in control, and that his plans are brilliant, and we can accept them. And I think idealists sometimes, we look around the world and we look around the suffering that we see in the world, whether it's the poverty, or we see, like you say, the divorce or relationships, or the lostness of the world, how many people are not saved. And it can be very distressing to us. And so, we create these realities where we have these expectations. Okay, so everyone will become Christians, and we'll solve world poverty, and we'll do all of this. And we see people striving to do that in NGOs and all these different organizations. And when it doesn't happen, they can get seriously disillusioned. But I think the humility to accept that we can do just our part, and even though it can feel very small and insignificant in our eyes, we can trust in the sovereignty of God, that he will work it out in the bigger plan, that he knows what he's doing. He allows things to happen, or he decrees them to happen. And for an idealist to really just accept that, I love the one quote that is in the book, And it says, the best thing one can do when it's raining is to let it rain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, an idealist is like, no, it's not meant to rain today. It's my wedding. It shouldn't rain today. And so you can get really angry and frustrated that it's raining and get, very disturbed by that. Or you can just say, okay, it's raining. What am I going to do? And accept it. And I think for an idealist, so much of the pain and suffering in our lives we bring onto ourselves because we don't accept certain realities. We refuse to. And I think we bring a lot of suffering onto our own hearts because of that.
Oof. Yes. I think I thought of as you were speaking and about the subject matter, it is really reminded me of the proverb that hope deferred makes the heart sick.
Yes.
And the shift in really is the shift in where my hope is. If my hope is in circumstances or things that change, then I can expect to have a lot of sick heart. A lot of sick heart along the road. But if my hope is somewhere else, or in the context of it's in the designer, and it's in the relationship, then my heart doesn't have to be as sick. And then naturally things will still happen, even as we mature. But I guess the extremes of the roller coaster ride doesn't have to be as extreme in that heart sickness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So talk about the most rewarding part about writing these first two books. Well, what's been rewarding about it for the both of you?
I think two things. One is just the partnership that Irene and I had doing it together. It's been so much fun together. Mm-hmm. Being able to work on it together, talk about it, go through even the process of learning how to self-publish and all of that. And it's been really a sort of a fun adventure to do together. Nice. And then I think the second part has been just the responses from people. I think, from people all across the world sort of writing emails saying, wow, this has changed my life. This has, helped me so much. From being invited to go and speak in Russia. We went this year in September. They asked us to come speak to the churches in Russia, and they said, look, every Russian is a wounded idealist.
Wow.
They believed so deeply in communism and that was the better ideology. And when that all fell apart, there was a wounding that took place. And then the perfection of the church, and that the church was a perfect place. And it was, and then that there was a wounding when the realization that it wasn't. So I think just the impact, the help, that has been able to resonate. And like Irene said, surprisingly, there's almost no material on this topic. Very few people seem to have actually covered it, dealing with how to overcome cynicism. And so it's been really fun.
I think for myself, the fact that people find it helpful is amazing because, again, Derek, as you know, one of the qualities of an idealist is we feel that we're very unique and that what we think is unique and our ideas are unique and, how we, our emotions are unique. And then suddenly you realize, wow, actually a lot of people feel this way. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually really great. Obviously, we share very vulnerably in the book, which is scary. But instead of, receiving judgment or a lot of criticism, we've actually received a lot of encouragement. So for me personally, that's been encouraging. And then the other thing that I have to laugh at myself, we wrote that book in 2017 and I am still an idealist. And every now and again, I need to go and read that book.
Yes.
and I laugh. I'll read a chapter and I'll run to Justin. I'll say, listen to this. And I read him what we've written. And I'll be like, this is so true. So for me personally, that is hilarious. It's like, I feel like the Holy Spirit is showing me things that we wrote down that only now are even making greater sense. So that's just funny.
I love that. I love that. No, it is. I completely relate 100%. And I heard somebody else say it first, but they were using the analogy that, you know, LeBron James in the NBA will go back and look at his tapes, you know, and look at his recordings to see how he could improve and all of this. And then, but then a speaker had said it too. They go back to theirs, and they were talking about how much they minister to themselves as they're listening to their own speeches. But you described it too. And I, of course, as a podcast host, I'll go back and I'll put on the podcast, and when I'm hosting it, I can't take notes as we're hosting, but I'll go back and listen to it and take a lot of great notes for, again, my speaking, my writing, and my teaching, what I get a chance to do. But sometimes, again, it sounds like the weirdest thing in the world, but I'm learning from myself, because things that are coming out of my mouth on that podcast, I've never thought of until I was in the moment, and I'm going, oh, wow, I said I'm going to put my name next to that quote, you know, which it sounds weird, but no, I relate totally to you, you know, even having that opportunity to minister to yourself, your 2017 self ministering to your 2019 self. So
exactly.
So, maybe this will be the last question before we jump into and before I hear about the favorite qualities about your family. So, the last one here is, what unique challenges have appeared relating to these two books? And it might be the vulnerability you mentioned earlier. Or it might be a little something different. What unique challenge has appeared relating with these two books?
Maybe the self-publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going through the process of learning how to self-publish a book was certainly unique. You know, and learning how to format it in such a way that, you know, that it would be accepted by Amazon, and, you know, getting all the little components together, the editing process, and how often you have to actually, you know, copy edit again and again and again. And you know, we had like 3 or 4 people go over and check for mistakes, and very talented people in terms of copy editing. And we went over it, and then we published it, and then people started sending in, you know, hey, listen, there's a mistake here and there's a mistake there, and we're like, what? How do you miss these little things? So, you know, so the attention to detail was actually surprisingly difficult to get right. And so that's certainly from my side.
Yes, got it.
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, Derek, you know, I thought after we've written these 2 books that I'm now a humble idealist, and I'm pretty much amazing. So even in that statement, you can see what the problem is. And I think probably for me, the most humbling thing about it is that, you know, is really embracing the lessons and not just writing them down. And, you know, when I get disappointed, is saying to myself, Irene, what would a humble person do? A humble person cannot be humiliated. So you're feeling humiliated. What would a humble person do? And sometimes I almost feel like I look at my old alter ego and I think, okay, what would a humble person do? And I think, you know, one of the things that Justin and I said after writing the second book is we will never write another book again, because we have 2 kids, but it feels like we have 4 now, because it was so much effort and thought and prayer and to write those 2 books. And yet, you know, it's an amazing thing, Derek. I think a 3rd book is on its way. And I think I recognize that, you know, we would probably entitle it An Idealist and the Sovereignty of God. And I think when an idealist meets the sovereignty of God, there is a battle of wills that an idealist must lose in the front of their maker. And I think that's the biggest thing that these books have revealed in me, is just the extent and level of my pride. I'm so thankful for the cross, because that really is the only hope I have. But I do think that is something Justin and I have been speaking a lot about, is the sovereignty. You know, we live in Southern Africa. There's a tremendous amount of suffering, poverty, HIV epidemic, you know, economic crises, political crisis. I mean, we live in a very, very wounded part of the world. And I think as an idealist is submitting to that sovereignty of God and not feeling incensed by things and incensed by that lack of impact that you can have. in a grand scheme. I mean, of course you can have impact in a small scheme, but an idealist doesn't want to have impact in a small scheme. They want to have impact in a great way.
That's right.
And really accepting that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that's surprised me about the book, is that I might be a third.
All right. Hey, we spoke it right here on the podcast. So, it's recorded now. All right. I love it. So to close out, I want to hear about your family members. So what are your favorite quality about Justin? For you, it's Irene, Elena, and Luke. And then, of course, for Irene, it's your favorite quality about Justin, Elena, and Luke.
Yeah, my favorite quality about my wife, without question, is just what a fighter she is. She has every challenge that she's faced. I've just seen her just dive into the Bible and dive into prayer and get input from other people. And she's never just sort of settled for anything in her life. And I just love that there's just there's no topic, there's no challenge, there's no problem that she faces that she's not going to fight her way through to the other side. And I just respect that so much about her, is just this sort of this passion to overcome. I think with my daughter, Elena, it's similar. It's just a passion. She came out of the womb. My wife has a Spanish heritage. She was born in Spain, and I think our daughter got a lot of that Spanish temperament, and just is passionate and emotional, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that one of the most wonderful things is just watching her learn how to tame it and boundary it and use it for good. So I just love that about my daughter. And then my son is the opposite. He is the most chilled guy. He was born here in Cape Town when we lived here. And he's got this coastal city vibe of just everything is chilled out. And he's one of the most consistent Christians. He's just, he just doesn't get bothered by much. He's just not shaken by much. There's a consistency about him that I love. So we've got such an interesting family of completely different people.
Love it. Love hearing that. Go ahead, Irene.
So I think what I love about Justin is he is unbelievably stable. I mean, this guy's incredible. We've been married 22 years, and I think in 22 years, I've seen him down maybe 5 days.
Wow.
In 22 years. I know, right? I know. For an idealist, it's very disturbing because I can be up and down quite a few times in one day. But I really love it. I love that, his relationship with God is so solid. He genuinely is a man of faith. He genuinely, things do not disturb him. I mean, they may disturb him, but he sees everything through a lens of heaven. And I respect that so much about him. He's an amazing father as well. Yes. Oh my goodness. He just loves these kids. They are so lucky to have him. I think my daughter Elena, her relationship with God, she fights for that relationship with God. She wants to see God. She wants to know God. She became, a Christian a while back, and she's an idealist like me, so we're very similar. And I think I just love it when I see her fighting and working through her relationship with God, really wanting to connect with God. I love that about her. And then my son, Luke, I think he's very similar to my husband, and he's very stable, and he's definitely wise beyond his years. I go to him and I ask him advice, and he gives me this advice, and I sit there with my jaw to the ground thinking, where did you get this wisdom from? Wow. So just respect my kids so much, and the decision they've both made to be disciples at such a young age is quite incredible. So very grateful for our family.
I love hearing about your family members and what you love about them. Thank you for joining the show. If you're tuning in, this is the Strong Life Coach podcast, where we speak life, coach life, write life, and lead life. I'm here with Justin and Irene Renton talking about their book, The Humble Idealist. And go ahead and go grab and buy that book. It's available for sure on Amazon. And then where else is it available?
IPI Books. They also stock them there.
IPI Books, Amazon. So that's where you can find them. But go grab the book. It will be good for you and your faith journey. And remember, for this podcast, like the podcast, give it the 5-star rating over on Apple Podcast. Share it with somebody who you think could benefit from it. And remember to subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Justin and Irene.
Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. Really appreciate you inviting us on.